All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are taking a sledgehammer to one of the biggest myths in modern politics. Get ready because the reality we're about to uncover completely defies common sense. It goes against everything we think we know about society. And the craziest part? It is driven entirely by hard, undeniable data. We're going to look at what researchers actually found when they put our deepest assumptions to the test.
So you hear it absolutely everywhere, right? On the news, online, in everyday conversations. Immigrants are stealing our jobs. And look, on the surface, it sounds totally rational. It makes perfect sense to want to protect your livelihood and worry about your paycheck. But when economists and sociologists actually ran the numbers, the math completely blew up that narrative. The data points to something entirely different.
Here's the brutal truth. We use economic anxiety as the ultimate scapegoat. It's an excuse. Researchers have found that worrying about your wallet often just serves as a socially acceptable mask. Beneath that mask is a deep-seated cultural clash, all dressed up as financial panic. Because let's be honest, it is so much easier to say, I'm worried about my job, than to admit, I'm genuinely uncomfortable with people who are different from me. Think about it this way. If this really was purely about job competition, high-skilled workers should be terrified of high-skilled immigrants, right? They'd be direct threats. But they aren't. The data reveals a massive paradox. Both high-skilled and low-skilled citizens prefer the exact same group of people, immigrants from wealthy nations. The whole economic logic just collapses right there. If it was about the job market, those preferences would be completely split. Now get a load of this number. 0. Literally 0. When researchers isolated the data to look strictly at employment status, 0 was the exact difference in anti-immigrant hate between employed people and unemployed people. Talk about an anti-common sense finding. If job scarcity was driving the anger, the unemployed should be furious. They have the absolute most to lose, but their hostility levels? Identical to people with totally secure jobs. Unemployed people simply don't hate immigrants any more than employed people do. And this perfectly aligns with the broader economic consensus. The actual real-world impact of immigration on a native worker's income is incredibly tiny. Why? Because immigrants don't just take jobs. They buy groceries, they rent apartments, they start businesses, they create massive new demand. So if your wallet isn't actually shrinking, why all the intense anger? We aren't just guessing here, by the way. This hard reality comes from the European Social Survey. We're talking about a massive data set tracking over 40,000 people across 22 different countries. It's basically a giant polygraph test for the entire continent. And sure, self-reported surveys have some limitations because people lie about their biases, but the sheer, massive scale of this data, it completely removes the guesswork. When you look at the raw survey data mapped out, a really stark pattern hits you right in the face. People are not sorting immigrants by the economic threat they pose, not at all. They are sorting them by where they come from. Immigrants from richer, familiar nations are welcomed with open arms. Meanwhile, folks from poorer, unfamiliar nations face a massive wall of resistance. It has absolutely nothing to do with a resume. It is 100% about the passport.
Okay, so if we completely strip away the job-stealing myth, what are we left with? The research definitively proves the economy is just an excuse. So if the trigger isn't an empty wallet, what is actually causing all this societal friction? What is fueling the intense outrage we see plastered all over the news every single night?
Boom, here is the answer. Researchers crunched the variables and found a staggering statistic. 65%. Well over half of this entire attitude gap comes down to just 3 things: cultural values, prejudice, and a lack of economic literacy. Hold everything else constant, and the vast majority of the fear is driven by culture, not paychecks. The actual financial argument, it accounts for just a tiny, tiny sliver of the hostility. So what are the real culprits? The study points directly to racial prejudice, a deep fear of diversity, and pure panic over national identity. The researchers make it crystal clear. Economic anxiety is just a socially acceptable smokescreen. People are profoundly uncomfortable with those who look different or speak differently, and they heavily cloak that discomfort in financial talking points. But hey, the data isn't all doom and gloom. It actually offers a solution, starting with that lack of economic literacy we just mentioned. And no, you don't need a finance degree from Wall Street for this. Economic literacy is just the basic, learned understanding that immigration historically generates long-term growth for the host country. It grows the pie for everyone. And the research shows that just knowing those baseline facts makes people measurably less afraid. Which brings up a fascinating question. If ignorance and a fear of the unfamiliar are fueling the fire, can education actually be the cure? Can a society literally teach tolerance? Researchers decided to look at education levels to see if simply sitting in a classroom changes how people view outsiders. And the findings here are wild. It completely flips common sense on its head. Elementary school, the data actually shows a negative correlation with supporting immigrants. High school, it barely moves the needle at all. But then, college hits. And out of nowhere, there is a massive, undeniable jump in tolerance. We're talking a night and day difference in the data. So why does that happen? Well, researchers theorize that high school basically just reinforces your local bubble. You're surrounded by people who are exactly like you. College, on the other hand, shatters that bubble completely. It doesn't just teach you skills. It radically rewires your worldview. It forces you to interact with diverse groups of people every single day, tearing down all those preconceived notions. Sociologists call this the plateau effect. It's incredibly powerful because it's not really about the textbooks you're reading, it's about the people you're meeting. Once a student reaches a certain level of diverse interaction, their fear of the other just permanently flatlines. The perceived cultural threat completely evaporates because the unknown has suddenly become familiar. So this brings us right to the doorsteps of modern policymakers. What happens when politicians try to fix this anti-immigrant anger by throwing job programs at it? Can you actually take cash and use it to solve a culture war? The research gives a resounding no. They will fail completely. If you try to treat a deep cultural divide with an economic band-aid, like throwing adjustment assistance at a culturally isolated town, you are completely missing the root cause. The underlying friction doesn't go anywhere. You simply cannot cure a cultural disease with financial medicine. And this perfectly highlights the massive trap our political discourse is stuck in. By constantly debating wages, taxes, and job security, we are fighting the totally wrong battle. The root issue is human tolerance. The data shows that as long as we keep arguing about paychecks, we're just deliberately avoiding the actual friction point in our society. The numbers leave zero room for debate here. Both sides of the political aisle are getting this completely wrong. Just listen to this conclusion straight from the researchers. If anti-immigration sentiments were primarily a function of economic fears, it would be reasonably easy to mitigate them, but this is not supported by the evidence. So, the data is screaming at us to stop using the economy as a scapegoat. If we actually want to address anti-immigrant friction, we have to do the hard work of changing minds, not wallets. So I'll leave you with this. Are we finally ready to drop the economic excuses and actually face our cultural divide head on?